Okay, so this is just going to be sort of a, not necessarily a review, but sort of like a review. I've had the Corsair Obsidian 650D for about 5 months now, and I've been sort of taking note of good points and bad points about the case, and I have notes, so I'm just going to go through them and show sort of each point, and so it's just going to be like my personal opinion and thoughts on the case. So I have notes here, good points, bad points, and I will get started with the good points. So first of all, it's a great value for the money. So you can get this, the normal price for it's $200, but you can get this for $150 in some places now. So for $150, there's lots of other options, and lots of good options too, but I think this is equivalent, is on par with the level of quality and features that you'll get with anything else for around $150. So it's great value for the money. But that's not going to stop me. I'm still going to list a lot of bad points about the case, but just keep in mind it's a great value for the money. So first things, minimal, clean looks, and the brushed aluminum front panel. So I don't like plastic. There's lots of cases that have a lot of plastic, and I don't like that. I like minimal and clean lines. I don't like a lot of plastic designs and shapes and aggressive sort of stuff. I like very clean, minimal design. So I love the design of this case. The power button glows when it's on. There's a little power logo and that glows white LED, and it's just right. It's not too bright. It doesn't light up the whole room crazy like some power LEDs like on the half 932. It's just right. It looks really nice, and I like that. The hot swap bay at the top. I've got cables in there now to show something else, but there's a hot swap bay at the top here for 2.5 or 3.5 inch drives, and I actually use that a lot. I use it almost every day, in fact. And that's one of those things I didn't think I would use it a lot, but I use it a lot, and I love that. So good airflow. No issues with the heat. And even the stock fans on low speed setting, it's very good ventilation. You can see the top, there's a huge section of hex mesh and a large section of mesh at the front. So very good airflow. It natively supports dual 120mm fans or dual 140mm fans in the roof. The build quality overall, the entire frame of the case except for the front is all steel, and it's good quality steel. It's not the thickest steel I've ever seen, like on some older cases, but it is very good steel, and it's strong, good, more than enough quality there. You're not going to have any trouble. The front panel though, it's wrapped in aluminum. There's about hopefully you can get to. There's about 2 millimeters. Okay, there, that's better. You can see there's about 2 millimeters worth of aluminum wrapped around the front for the finish, and then behind that, the front panel is plastic. So obviously I would prefer that the whole thing be aluminum, but more on that later. Good cable management. Lots of good options for cable management. We'll show that once I start showing the inside. Good amount of space behind the motherboard. That's good. Doors are very easy to get off and on with the clips, and I like the clips a lot, but there's a big downside to the clips, and I'll get to that in a minute. When there is a window, it's decent. More on that later as well. Pretty good I/O at the front. There's two USB 2s and USB 3s, two USB 3s, and there is a FireWire, but I don't have that connected, and there's front audio, and I don't have that connected either. Dust filter is easy to get off and easy to clean, but it's actually too easy to get off, and I will have more on that later as well. The hard drive cages have flexible options. You can take the top section off, you can mount it near the power supply, you can take the bottom section off, you can take both of them off. So that's flexible. Very large CPU cutout. I know in some older cases there is CPU cutouts and they're not very large and they sort of end up blocking a portion of the back plate, so you can't even get it off and it's not very useful at all. With this, it's pretty standard on cases these days, but up until very recently it wasn't. So there's a very large back plate and it's going to be fine for anything you'll put in. It supports most large tower coolers, so the D14 we've got in here, no problem with that. There's no fan in the door either, so no problem getting the D14 in. Hot graphics cards, no problem with that. It's very quiet. I've got all Noctua fans in here. They're all on low speed reducers, and the case is almost silent. Even though there's no sound deadening material anywhere, it's just a normal steel. It's a very quiet case. And then there's good recessed areas, like at the top here. There's this whole area here, about 2.5 inches of sort of recessed area you can hide lighting in nicely, and you're not going to see it directly through the top or anything, and so it's pretty good for installing lighting in it. Okay, now we're going to get to the negative points. So one of the things is with these front optical drives, when you've got a drive in, there's a little ridge here. You can see it there. When you've got a drive in, and on drives, they tend to have something similar to that little ridge. So that locks up against this. When you have a drive in there, or fan controller in there, or something in there, you can't get the front panel off unless you remove that. Now that's fine for optical drives, it's easy to remove those, but with something like a fan controller where it's, you know, a short thing and you've got to fiddle with one screw and get it flush with this, nice and flush, once you get it like that, it's a real pain to get it off. Yeah, you can't remove the front, okay. Cable routing hole near the power supply. Now that's one of those small things. Right near here, I would like to see a little cutout just above the power supply, right here. And the reason for that is you can see I've got a fan and I've got the lighting panel, and both of those cables have to make their way all the way over to here. If there was a little cutout here with a little grommet, or even just a bare cutout, I could put both those cables straight through there, and that would be neater, and I'd like to see that. I saw that on the Fractal R4, but the motherboard does cover it, but I bet you could put a cable through there before the motherboard and have it be routed through there, and that would be nice. The fans that come with it are loud and not very good quality. There's two 200mm fans, and on these fans, after I ran it for a little while, I actually noticed that there was some grease building up in between here, where these little holes are, where the motor is. And they're very loud on the fan controller that comes with it. There's low, medium, and high. They're not too bad on high, but they're very loud on medium, or not too bad on low, but they're very loud on medium and high. There's this fan, which is just a generic cheap 120 at the back. The fan controller comes with it. I haven't had trouble with mine. There's a fan controller up here with a little switch. Low, medium, and high just here. I've heard people say the fan controller has died within a week, but mine's still fine and it still works. But I'm not using it right now. But I did use it for a few months and it was fine. But it's definitely not premium or anything. But it's minimal. I like that better than having some sort of big switches and buttons around the top integrated into the design like some cases do. I'd rather just have a little small switch that's minimal, that is going to just be covered when you close the door. Now these cables, one of the things when you have this, one of the things I don't like about the design, although I like, is this. It's not a big deal, but just this, the way the door comes out almost all the way to the edge like the covers, but then stops, and then there's a little power button. It looks like this was just tacked on, and it doesn't look very doesn't look quite right to me. Yeah, it looks like it was just tacked on after, like an afterthought. This line doesn't quite really flow with me. But also the door, I almost 100% of the time I have stuff connected in here, and then as you saw, this door here just hangs down. So the door is just always sitting open, and so it's kind of not the best design because it's just always open. It's never shut, for me anyway. It has no native support for 120mm fans at the front. Now I've got 120mm fans at the front, but what I've had to do is cut with the Dremel to get them in there. This thing here, this clip, fan controller, every day when I move the case, sometimes I have my hand near the front, or I just tap it and I hit it and the dust filter falls off onto the floor. And you see these little fingers that clip in, that one of them has already cracked off and I had to glue it. So it's good because some cases have a more difficult dust filter to get off and on. So the fact that it's easy to just clip it on and off is good. And they use the same clip here. You see the two little fingers, and that grabs onto there. That's good because it's easy to get off and on, but it's not the best design as far as it's not the strongest design. It's just little tiny plastic fingers, and holding it is just a tiny bit of plastic there that's so thin I can imagine it breaking easily. But on this, it wasn't actually the little clip, it was actually the little nub that goes into the clip that broke. Because I also have a dent on the corner of the fan controller on the fan mesh, because the thing fell off one time and hit the ground on the corner and it dented it. I was able to do a little marker, and it's not too noticeable, but the fan controller, fan mesh, has fallen off a few times for me by accident while I was moving the case. Yeah, I've already mentioned the front panel is plastic covered in aluminum. I'd prefer if it was all aluminum, but I understand because of the price. USB 3 is pass-through. It's a pass-through only, so it's got male USB 3s on the end instead of an actual proper 19-pin header. So you've got to get the one of those adapters, and that's bulky. I don't like that. So I have a bunch of other things to cover. I'm just going to cut and then make a part 2. Okay, so you can see a few things here. Because of the light, you can't see it as good as I'd like. Well, first thing you can see is that the side attracts tons of fingerprints, and that's the same applies for the front. In fact, the brushed aluminum front basically scuffs very easily and attracts loads of dust, and so it's never really clean. It's always sort of scuffed and dusty. And then the side you can sort of see more on the left, loads and loads and loads of fingerprints, but usually it's more dark and you can't really see it, so I'm not one to complain about fingerprints. Even with glossy stuff, I don't care about fingerprints that much, but I'm just mentioning it because you can just so I can cover everything fairly thoroughly. The side panel window. Now I like the clips, as I mentioned, but because of the clips, the window has to end very low. I'd like to see the window going all the way up to about here, so that you can see a lot more of the CPU socket area and the RAM and all that stuff. But because of the clips, it has to be a lot lower, and so you only get the window in the bottom section more. And I'd prefer it to be much higher. So I'd rather have something like what NZXT does, where they have the single screw in the bottom, and then there's a little notch, and you push the screw down, and then that pops out like a quick release. But it's sort of all at the back, and takes up no additional space. Okay, dust filter comes off easily. Noisy front mesh. Okay. So the front mesh, by default, comes with the same kind of mesh as this, which is sort of circular mesh design cut out. And at the front, that creates a lot of noise with the fan that comes with it, which is those 200mm that I showed you. So I've obviously cut it out, and some other people cut it out too, but that's a bad design, because if all they had to do, this stuff here doesn't make noise, the hex design. So all you had to do was make the front and the rear mesh the same as this, and then it would have been no problem. All the fans do come with nice large screws, as you can see from the top here. These screws are very large head, and they all come with rubber grommets. All the fan holes come with rubber grommets. At the top here you can see there's holes for a 200mm as well as holes for dual 120 and dual 140 fans. That was something I'd like to see at the front as well. Even if the case sells with a stock 200mm fan, I'd like to see the option for at least dual 120s, so that way you can fit your own higher quality 120 fans without having to do cutting and drilling your own holes and all that stuff. If they just did the same screw pattern, screw hole, fan mounting hole, rather, pattern is here at the front to accept all three sizes, that would be ideal in my opinion. The side panel window, the acrylic on it is a bit warped. So it's certain types of light, mainly with like light from the room, you see, even if you run your finger down it, you see it's not really straight, and light reflects off it different ways. Here with the natural light, you don't really see it, but the light sort of, it's like one of those mirrors that distort. It's like it distorts the light if it hits a certain way. It also creaks a lot. You can see the door kind of creaks quite a bit. That's not too big of a deal, I'm just being fussy. Yeah, on the 900D I've noticed they made a very large window that goes all the way towards the front and all the way towards the top and bottom, and that's the sort of window I prefer. I like a very large window because I like to see everything that I've got in there, rather than having a big gap along the top where the clips are. I'd rather just have NZXT have the one screw like that. At the back here you'll see near the PCI slots. There's just two, external water cooling grommets, which is external water cooling radiators. To me, is never going to be something that I'm going to use. So I'd rather see, like on some of the Cooler Master cases, they have a section of hex mesh here, so that the hot air coming from the video card can exhaust a bit here. And when the video card's pumping out tons and tons of hot air, I'd say having a section of mesh here for a bit of passive airflow from that would be better than having grommets for external water cooling. Okay, the power button. So you can see I have the power button and I fixed it. It makes a click when you push it, as it should. But the button is a very, very cheap button, and I actually have a separate video on this that you can see. But basically, the way it's mounted, at least the way it's mounted on this particular case, the power button is sort of mounted a little too high up. There's a little screw up here where it's attached. The button is attached, and the little nib on the back of this button that's supposed to make contact with the actual button that's attached to the frame, it actually sort of misses it. So it's the little nib is too low down to actually make contact with the button on the frame, and so the button itself rubs against the side here, and then it doesn't actually click the button directly, and it makes loads and loads of it doesn't make the clicking noise that it should, and it's very, very stiff and hard to push it. So you go to push the power button the way it comes, and it's like just stiff, and you don't even hear that sound. You don't even hear that with the stock power button the way it is. So that's little things like that. It still gets the thing on and off, but little things like that drive me nuts. Like, it bugs me so much. So I had to go and fix it, or we were able to fix it. But that stuff like that on a case I know it's a cheaper case, but I think that they should be able to make a button that works properly for a $200 case. So I'm irritated with that. I've got it fixed, but you needed to with an ironing a solder machine, take the little end of the solder and melt the little piece and slide it down a little bit, but it would be easy to break it completely, so it was kind of a risky thing to do. It's not something that most people are going to be doing to fix the power button. Most people will probably just live with it. Okay, hard drive trays. And here's the piece. I've got a piece of the mesh that I've cut out. This is a piece of the front mesh. You can see it sort of, it's focusing on stuff in the background, but basically you can see it's circular instead of the hexagon pattern. Okay, the trays. Hard drive trays. They're very flimsy. They're plastic, thin plastic, and they flex a lot like this, which is fine. That's how you get the drive in. But then this little piece that you use to pull it out. On this one, I was pulling a drive out, and one of them snapped right off. So I was just taking 2 fingers to pull the drive out like you normally would, pressing it just enough to get the drive loose, and then it just cracked. So that's ridiculous. I think that's crap. On the Fractal Design cases, they do it a little differently. They have both drives attaching from the bottom, and then they have a nice, strong, good quality steel tray. So instead of having to flex it to get the drive in from the side like that, to get these nubs to attach to the side, they've got the holes in the bottom. So you have a nice steel, stiff tray. You put the drive in, screw it on the bottom, and then that's a much better quality, in my opinion. So I'd like to see that instead of using a plastic flexible tray, I'd like to see a steel tray with mounting screws on the bottom, like the Fractal Design does. Okay, so little things. I always find plenty of little things, like on the serial ATA ports here, you'll see, and this was the same with my other motherboard, the middle serial ATA port is right in the center of the two grommets. So in order to run a cable to these, you have to either come from up here and do a bend, or come from down here and do a bend. Either way, it's bending and it's not able to go straight out like you see with the bottom one going straight out. So it's not just this motherboard. I had a Sabertooth X58, and in here it was exactly the same. The middle serial ATA was right in the middle of the two grommets, so that's annoying. Another thing I'd like to see is with the grommet, you can see the well, okay, it's not focusing. With the grommet, I'd like to see more flaps. So instead of having just one big flap like this, I'd like to see this divided up into 3 or 4 smaller flaps like they do on the NZXT cases. I think that's nicer for running small cables. You can just bend one flap if you're running a very small cable and have it look more neat. The finished product will look a little bit more neat if you've got the, you know, the more fine flaps cut instead of just larger flaps. With this one, if you're running a cable through, you've got to have this whole big flap open, like on the motherboard power one. See this motherboard power one? This whole flap is being bent out. That's just another fussy little thing. Well, and this is not specific to this case, but the grommets are actually great quality rubber, and they are very soft, but they do attract lots of dust, and they're hard to clean. The rubber grommets, they're hard to clean and get the dust off, especially if you've got cables running through them. You can't really take them out easily unless you detach the cable. That's no big deal, and that's not specific to this case either, because any case with rubber or grommets would have a similar problem, I'm sure. Cable anchor points. Oh, also, this section here, when you've got the drive, you can take the top section of the drive or the bottom section and mount it here, but it's the metal they use for the drive cage is very thin, and so if you mount it here, it's not anchored to anything at the top, so it's very flimsy. But also this section, this here is a cutout for the cables to run through if you've got it mounted here. I'd like to see a sort of a blanking plate like you see on some fans and some back plate areas, where you could take a plate, screw it on here, and cover that up when you're not using it. The cable anchor points, there are some, but well, I don't have any blank ones, but they're very small. So they're so small that you can you basically get one of the small 4-inch ties through. Oh, here's one. You see next to here, you get one small 4-inch tie through, and then that's about it. Some cases, like you see on NZXT cases and some of the newer Cooler Master, you see anchor points which are much larger loops, so you can get more ties through them, larger ties, or whatever. It's just more or less fussy to work with, and to get. Basically, you see, I've got all of these anchor points with the double-sided tape, and I've added a bunch of them in where I need them to add more anchor points. I've used those for the fan cables, some of them, and for the lighting around the edges, around the top, roof, the front, side, all around. I've used that for the anchor, for extra anchors wherever I need them. But I'd like to see just around the back, in the normal places where you normally see anchor points, I'd like to see larger ones and some more. Also, for routing, if you're taking one main cable line and routing all the way to the top, you sort of get halfway up, and then you can't really have here you can't really anchor it anywhere. I'd like to see maybe a gap here with an anchor point or something like that, where I could take a cable right from the bottom and go all the way straight up, and then have an extra point to anchor it sort of halfway up. But that's just another small thing. Paint finish. Some people have said that the paint finish chips easily around the hot swap bay area. I haven't found that to be the case yet, and like I said, I use it a lot. What I have found to be the case, though, is that it gets quite dusty in here, and I guess that's just because there is gaps, and I guess the pressure in the case, I've got 2 fans in, 2 fans out, so it should be sort of neutral pressure, but I guess it might be negative pressure a bit, so that's why dust is building up there. Not a big deal, but you see here on the corners, or you might be able to see there's paint chip on this corner and paint chip on this corner. So the people have complained of the paint chipping easily around here or wherever. So far I've only had paint chips at the corners for whatever reason. I guess taking this front panel off and then having this corner exposed, and then maybe whatever happens there happens. I'm going to show just the feet here. When you're going to take the front feet off, so these front feet, well, it's too bright, but basically when you're taking these front feet off, this piece here with the front feet, you need to, the screws are under this sticker here. So you need to either poke a hole through the sticker and get your screwdriver in there, or take the whole sticker off and try to get it back on, but when you do that, it never goes on as good as it was in the first place, or whatever, or cut half the sticker and leave the front half and then take the back half off where the screw is. Either way, if you want to take this off, like if you're doing Dremel work like I was doing, I was cutting the front mesh out, and I wanted, this thing overhangs. You see, this is the frame, steel frame ends here. And then this is all front panel, about 1.5 inches. So this foot overhangs right to the edge of the front panel. So if you want to take this foot off so that it doesn't overhang, you've got to deal with breaking the grip sticker on the feet, whichever way you choose. And it would be nice if they had sort of made the hole, where the sticker isn't. Yeah, so the stock fans are allowed, I mentioned that. Rivets. There are quite a few rivets used in this case, like with the optical bay mounting area. The steel frame is put together with rivets. That's not unusual with this price point, but I would like to see screws instead of rivets. Yeah, plastic clips on the mesh and on the front I/O panel are not very strong. They might break easily. The door clips do come off, which is fine. That's good that they come off, but they come off kind of easily. There's just a little clip that holds them on. You see there's just a little 2 clips that hold them on here and here, and then you can push it right out. I found that a couple of times as I was handling the door, the clips were actually popping out just as I was holding it. Optical bays, I'd like to see, there's 4. I've sort of, with some cases I've seen recently, I think like the Fractal Design R4, for example, I've seen, and they have just two optical bays, and then 8 hard drives, I believe. And I think that nowadays, I know I don't use an optical drive. Some people want a bay reservoir, which I think looks better. I don't like the internal reservoirs at all, the tube ones. I think those are not very nice looking. I like the dual bay reservoirs, but what I'd like to see is, instead of having 4 optical bay areas, I'd like to see just 2. And I think that looks a bit better. It looks more balanced, and it's not big enough on a case like this to put 3 front fans, but if a case was a little taller, maybe have 3 front fans. But just in this case, have 2 optical bays and then have 8 hard drives instead. And maybe even break up the hard drives into 3 sections, but on the Facto they have 1 smaller section and 1 larger section with 5 drives, which I like the way they did that. 1 section with 3 drives, 1 section with 5, and I like that. Okay, so yeah, so that's everything on my notes. And other than that, I mean, that's a lot, I know. That's a lot, but all of those things are sort of small things. So once I got, the main things were the power button bugged me, and the fans at the front with the noisy mesh bugged me. So I fixed both of those things. Now that I've fixed both of those things, I've got Noctua fans in there, and the power button's fixed. Now I like the case, and I'm fine with the case. I don't know how long I'm going to keep it. Originally I was thinking, oh, I'll dump it and get something else. I might end up keeping it for a little bit longer. Don't know how long I'll keep it, but now that I've got those 2 things, those were the 2 main problems, and those 2 things are fixed now. So, oh, okay, I forgot one thing. Basically here, I'll get a drive to show it. Basically, the hot swap bay, to make it very fast and easy to do it, it's on an angle. So you put a drive in, and then the drive sort of sticks up out of the top like that. Now I've seen on some cases recently, like the BitPhoenix Ghost is the one that comes to mind. There's a rectangular tray at the front that has the drive. The hot swap connections are here. I mean, there's a recessed, at the top there's a recessed a couple inches with a little cover that slides over like this. So you just put the whole drive in, clip it in, and then you can have a whole, the cover, and just cover it right up like that, and you wouldn't even know a drive was in there at all. And then I think there, on some of them, it might not be the Ghost, but there was even a little thing at the top. You can put a clip over, or a cap over the serial HA ports, and use it as a little bin for screws and stuff. Now that's another thing. On the half 932, there was a little recessed area with a little rubber mat in the bottom, and I would put my screws and my spare change and stuff like that in there. That's the one thing I miss the most about the 932. I didn't like it very much. Didn't like the design, the look, or anything about it really. But the one thing I did like a lot was the little compartment at the top with the rubber mat that I would put my change in. So with something like that BitPhoenix Ghost, a hot swap bay that's the same sort of shape as that recessed area, with and you can put a little cap over the serial HA connections and use it like a little bin for screws and change. That's one thing I really like, and I would prefer to have a hot swap bay that had that sort of design. Now maybe if you have the cover over the drive might get a little warm, but if that's the case, just leave the door open. That's one thing. I like the hot swap bay and I use it all the time, but one thing I'd like more is a recessed sort of stealth hot swap bay like on the BitPhoenix Ghost. Now I think that's all that I have for now. And I say for now, I certainly won't be doing another video on it. I did forget one thing though, and that was it's not specific to this, not specific necessarily to one fan controller, but I've only had the one. When I put the Lamptron FC6 into the front, the screw holes did not line up with the screw holes here. The the faceplate was about 3-4 millimeters back behind the face of the case. So I had to take a file and file forwards 3-4 millimeters in order for the Lamptron fan controller to sit flush with the case. So if they had holes that were, instead of being like round holes that were fixed, if they had holes that were sort of like a track, and you could just move the drive forward and backward as you wanted, that would be more flexible. Okay, so I'm just going to wrap it up now because it's gone on very long, but I just wanted to cover everything I like, everything I dislike about the Corsair 650D. So this is my 650D review, I guess. I guess they could call this a review. It's basically my thoughts on it, my notes on it, and I've had it for 5 months, and this is just what I think about it after having it for 5 months.